What if the whole idea of the Quran's miracle is wrong? Or at least, what if we've been looking for it in completely the wrong place? Today, we're digging into a really provocative argument from a philosopher who says that faith, specifically Islam, isn't really about blind faith at all. It's about pure, hard reason.
So let's start with a really basic question. When we say the word Islam, what are we actually talking about? It seems simple, right? Well, according to the thinker we're looking at today, that simple question is, well, it's the whole ballgame. He argues that the answer is way more complicated than we think, and if you don't get this first part right, everything else just falls apart.
And here's why. To even start to understand his argument, we have to get our definitions clear. He lays out this framework that is absolutely key to everything that follows. It's a simple but really powerful idea. There isn't just one Islam.
Nope.
He says there are three.
So, what are these three versions? He calls them the source, the interpretation, and the popular.
Okay, so here's how he breaks it down. First, you've got what he calls Islam 1. This is the source, right? The Quran, the Prophet's traditions, the original raw data, you could say. Then you have Islam 2. This is all the stuff the scholars and the jurists have built on top of that source. It's the whole library of interpretations. And finally, there's Islam 3. And this is the street-level popular religion, the stuff that's common among the masses, spread through culture and popular preachers. It's the Islam of tradition.
Okay, so you have these three options. Which one are you supposed to follow? And this is where we get the first big twist in this whole argument. The answer is none of them. Seriously. He says the very act of following is the problem. It's seen as a failure of our most basic duty to think for ourselves. And this leads to a pretty radical conclusion about what faith and personal responsibility are all about.
Right, so this idea leads to a very bold, very ethical claim. The idea that just accepting what someone else says isn't just lazy. He says it's actually an unethical act. And here's the core of that claim. The argument is that when you blindly follow anyone, I don't care if it's one famous scholar or 1,000 respected ones, you are essentially outsourcing your own humanity. You're giving away your most fundamental responsibility, which is the duty to use your own brain and think for yourself.
So if you're not supposed to follow, what are you supposed to do? Well, the alternative he proposes is a path that centers on this concept of burhan. Now, what's a burhan? It's a reasoned proof. It's an argument that convinces you all by itself, just based on its own internal logic. You don't believe it because some smart person said it. You believe it because you've worked through the logic, you get it, and you've made that conclusion your own. And you can see how this sets up two totally different ways of believing, right? On one hand, you have following men. You believe something because so-and-so said it. But that's fragile, isn't it? Another respected person could come along and take that belief away. He calls this unethical. But on the other hand, you have following reason. Here you accept something because you get the proof, the burhan. That belief becomes yours. And that, he says, isn't just a better way to believe, it's your intellectual and ethical duty.
Okay, so this all makes sense. If we have to use our own reason, it begs the question, where do we even start? What do we apply our reason to? If we can't just trust the interpreters, we need some kind of raw material, a foundation.
And the logical starting point, he argues, has to be the foundational text itself, the Quran. But here's the catch. In a system that's built entirely on reason, you can't just assume anything. Not even the authority of the source text. No, that too has to be proven. It has to stand up to rational scrutiny.
So how do you do that? Well, the first step is to look at all the traditional arguments for why the Quran is authoritative. And the claim here is that the most common proofs for its so-called miraculous nature, they just don't hold water when you really rationally pick them apart.
Let's look at them. First, the literary miracle. Well, that's just a dead end, isn't it? It's totally subjective. Believers say it's perfect. Non-believers point out what they see as errors. You can't prove it one way or the other. Then you have the scientific miracles. The problem here is that it's all post hoc reasoning. People are finding these discoveries in the text after science already found them. Why didn't anyone use the Quran to discover them beforehand? And finally, the prophetic miracles. Again, they're basically unverifiable. We can't actually prove the text was written before the events it supposedly predicted. So from a strictly rational view, these arguments just don't work as solid proof.
So, if the old proofs fail, if these traditional pillars just crumble when you push on them, is there any rational basis left? Is that it? Well, no, because this is where the argument takes a really sharp turn and introduces its central and, frankly, most startling claim. The whole idea is that we've been looking for the miracle, the ayajaz, in completely the wrong places. He argues the real miracle isn't about the form of the text, but about its substance. It's about the content.
Here it is. The real miracle, he claims, isn't in the fancy language or the so-called science or the prophecies. It is in the message. The core idea is that the ethical and legal system inside the Quran is so incredibly advanced, so far beyond its time, that it simply could not have been produced by a 7th century human mind. This is his burhan. This is his reasoned proof for its authority.
Think about it. He argues this is an ethical and legal system that was just impossible for 7th century Arabia to dream up on its own. It's a moral framework that he claims surpasses even our greatest modern achievements, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's so alien to the time and place it came from that it points to an origin that isn't, well, human.
And he gives concrete examples to back this up. Look at this verse. Do not let the hatred of a people prevent you from being just. Be just. That is nearer to righteousness. Now just think about that for a second. It's not just saying be just. It's saying be just to people you actively hate, even while you're at war with them. That is an insane psychological and ethical demand. And it's the polar opposite of a tribal us versus them mentality.
And this is where he compares it to modern human rights. Look, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is an incredible achievement of human reason, no doubt. But the Quranic ethic, he argues, goes even further. It demands justice for an attacking enemy during a war. It demands you accept a peace offer even if you think it's a trap. That's a standard that goes beyond what even modern conventions require. It's putting the possibility of peace above your own suspicion and self-preservation. That's a mind-blowingly advanced idea.
Okay, so what does all of this mean for you, for the individual? This brings us to the ultimate point of the entire argument. It's about where the final authority really lies.
And the appeal is simple but powerful. The call to action is to go directly to the Quran yourself. Cut out the middlemen. Avoid the filters of all the historical commentators and interpreters, that's Islam 2 and 3. Instead, you engage directly with Islam 1, the source. And the tool you use? It's your own reason, your own aql. Because a faith built on your own personal, reasoned conviction, that's a faith, he says, is stronger than mountains.
And you know what's fascinating is that this idea isn't even necessarily new. He points out that you can find this sentiment in classical sources. This quote says it all. Whoever enters the religion through men, men will take him out of it. Whoever enters through the book, mountains will crumble before he does. A belief you get from someone else can be taken by someone else. But a belief you build yourself through reason, that's unshakable.
And that really leaves us with a final, really provocative question to think about. Is the whole point of faith to just follow an interpretation that someone else gives you, or is it to form your own? It completely reframes religion, not as a passive act of following, but as an active, ethical, and deeply personal journey of discovery.